Mbappe and Haaland collide as France and Norway risk their knockout routes. Who actually controls this final night? Tablo Sports has Gary Neville pushing Morgan Rogers, the USMNT facing Turkey already through, and third-place Chaos bending the bracket. First, the tournament's marketable monster. Mbappe-Haaland showdown frames France-Norway knockout fight in Group F. We start with the match television executives would have drawn up if FIFA gave them a whiteboard, a coffee machine, and no sense of shame. Mbappe-Haaland showdown frames France-Norway knockout fight in Group F. The lazy version is Mbappe versus Haaland as a poster duel. The sharper version is France and Norway walking into a Group F finale where one mistake can reshape the round of 32 path. Star branding sells the match, but qualification pressure decides how both teams actually play. Senegal and Iraq matter here too because Group F is not a two-man commercial. If either side treats this like a private Golden Boot audition, the group can punish them quickly. Al Jazeera is framing France against Norway as the Kylian Mbappé versus Erling Haaland showdown for the knockouts, and of course that is the headline that travels fastest. Mbappé running at a defense with space behind it, Haaland waiting for one half chance in the box, France trying to impose control, Norway trying to make the game direct and uncomfortable. That is the marketing package. But this is not a club rivalry story, and it should not be reduced to one of those superstar comparison debates where everyone pretends football is played by 2 men and 20 extras. Here is the important bit. beIN Sports reports that France, Norway, Senegal, and Iraq all have qualification scenarios tied to Group F, which means this final day match has direct round of 32 consequences. The permutations affect seeding, safety, and possibly the tone of the entire knockout route. France cannot just assume the badge takes them through cleanly. Norway cannot just hope Haaland scares the group into submission. In an expanded World Cup, one goal in one stadium can change the bracket for teams not even touching the ball at that moment. That detail matters because Mbappe and Haaland create completely different kinds of panic. Mbappe tilts the pitch before he receives the ball. Defenders start dropping early because they know what happens if they are even half a yard square. Haaland can look detached for 20 minutes, then turn one low cross into a national trauma. So the tactical question is not who is more famous, it is whether France can control Norway's supply line and whether Norway can keep enough structure behind Haaland to survive France's speed. Star power sells it, group math sharpens it, and the round of 32 bracket waits with a receipt. From one headline duel to a selection argument, England fans will somehow turn into a national referendum by breakfast. Gary Neville has put a very clear name into Thomas Tuchel's headache. Gary Neville says Morgan Rogers should replace Anthony Gordon for England against Panama. This is being treated like a simple left-wing preference, but it is really about England's attacking rhythm after a flat result. Neville's opinion matters because it gives a frustrated fan base a clean target. Anthony Gordon out, Morgan Rogers in. The reporting we have says this is Neville's view, not an England decision. That is not the same as signed and announced on a team sheet. Tuchel benefits from the debate only if it creates urgency without trapping him inside a public popularity contest. Sky Sports says Gary Neville would drop Anthony Gordon and start Morgan Rogers on the left wing against Panama after England's frustrating goalless draw against Ghana. So let us be clear on this. Rogers has not been confirmed to start. This is not done yet. It is a pundit making a selection argument before an important World Cup match, and because this is England discourse, the volume immediately goes from sensible debate to village bell tower. The football logic is easy to understand. Morgan Rogers, Aston Villa, Anthony Gordon, Newcastle United. Rogers gives England a different feel on that side, more carrying power, more interior movement, and potentially a better way to connect midfield to the final third when the game gets sticky. Gordon offers direct speed and pressing energy, but if England look blunt against Ghana, continuity suddenly starts to look like stubbornness. That is the uncomfortable bit for Tuchel. Loyalty looks calm when the team is winning. After a goalless draw, it can look like the manager is admiring a locked door instead of trying another key. England's final group position shapes their round of 32 route, so the Panama match is not a soft stage for experimentation with no consequences. Tuchel has to decide whether Rogers is the sharper fit for this specific game or whether the call becomes an overreaction to one frustrating performance. Fans want form rewarded, managers want structure protected. Neville has thrown the debate into public view, but the team sheet is still where the risk becomes real. Meanwhile, the host nation has the opposite problem. The United States already has a knockout place, but Turkey is not a friendly wearing World Cup makeup. USMNT face Turkey after already clinching round of 32 place. The temptation is to say the USMNT can relax now. That is the trap, because qualification secured does not erase seeding, rhythm, or the pressure of playing at home. Pochettino's real decision is not rotation versus strongest team as a slogan, it is how much sharpness he can protect without turning the final group match into a fitness gamble. The USA have room to manage minutes, but they do not have permission to look casual in front of their own crowd. NPR reports that the US men's team have already clinched a round of 32 place before facing Turkey. ABC News frames the match around the team chasing a third straight win. Those two facts create the tension. The hard qualification box is ticked, but the emotional and competitive boxes are still open. At a home World Cup, momentum is not some fake studio word. It is the difference between a crowd feeling like a weapon and a crowd starting to check the bracket on its phone. Look, this is where Mauricio Pochettino has to be careful. Rotate too much, and the USA may lose the rhythm that got them through. Push too hard, and one injury or one suspension risk can make everyone ask why the manager treated a secured group position like a final. Turkey will not arrive as a decorative opponent. They can disrupt tempo, test defensive concentration, and turn a managed night into a messy one if the US start playing like the serious work begins later. The fan split makes sense. One side wants key players protected before the round of 32. The other side wants a third straight win because vibes are not fake when they are attached to a knockout draw in a stadium full of belief. The correct answer may be somewhere uglier. Manage the load but demand the same intensity. The USA are already through, yes, that is not the same as having nothing to play for. At the same time, the expanded World Cup is doing exactly what its critics warned and its defenders promised. Everyone is staring at third-place tables like they are decoding a tax document. World Cup third-place race shapes round of 32 qualification drama. The best third-place race is now one of the tournament's main engines of suspense. Whether that is brilliant drama or manufactured confusion depends on how much chaos you enjoy with your football. The format benefits teams that stay alive just long enough, but it also makes clarity harder for fans watching multiple groups at once. The bracket is not just won on the pitch now, it is tracked across live tables and tiebreakers. This is the expanded World Cup's bargain. More nations alive, more nights with calculators. The New York Times has a live tracker for World Cup 2026 third-place berths, and The Independent is tracking third-place rankings in the race to reach the knockout stages. That tells you where the tournament has arrived. The late group stage is no longer just first versus second. Win and you are in, lose and you are out. Now the drama leaks sideways across the competition. A draw in one group can become excellent news for a third-place team somewhere else. The key mechanism is simple enough until it gets cruel. Third-place ranking uses points and FIFA tiebreakers to allocate final knockout berths. That means goal difference, goals scored, discipline records, and other criteria can suddenly become the difference between going home and entering the round of 32. Put it this way, a team can leave the pitch miserable, then spend hours becoming happier because another result elsewhere rescued them. That is not traditional Jeopardy. That is tournament suspense with a spreadsheet attached. Fans are debating whether this format adds drama or creates confusion, and both sides have evidence. More teams stay alive, which keeps more fan bases emotionally invested. But if supporters need multiple live trackers to understand whether their country is safe, the format has a communication problem. The result is a World Cup where the final whistle is not always the ending. Sometimes the ending is another match, another tiebreaker, and a bench full of players watching phones instead of grass. That third-place chaos leads straight into the uncomfortable governance bit. The expanded format is not just creating drama, it is creating incentives that look a little too convenient. BBC highlights draw incentive flaw in 2018 World Cup group finale. The BBC's point is not that teams will collude. The point is that a format should not create obvious moments where two teams can both benefit from refusing risk. That is a competitive integrity problem before it becomes a conspiracy problem. Football does not need villains for incentives to become awkward. FIFA wanted expansion to bring more stories. The bill arrives when some of those stories involve teams realizing a draw may be the safest business decision. BBC Sport reports that 2 final round group matches create the possibility of teams playing out draws to qualify, and the article frames this as a flaw in the 2018 World Cup format. The wording matters. This is not a confirmed claim that any team will intentionally collude. It is a warning about the structure of the competition, where the incentives can become strange enough that ordinary tactical caution looks suspicious before a ball is kicked. The 2018 World Cup sends 32 teams into the knockout phase, and that creates a huge middle zone of survival. When so many teams can still qualify, and when third-place routes exist, the final group games can produce situations where ambition is not always rewarded. Sometimes the clever move is to avoid disaster. Sometimes both teams know it. That is when the sport starts to feel a little too much like two people silently agreeing not to touch the last slice of pizza because the camera is on. Supporters are right to question whether the expanded format protects competitive integrity. The issue is not expansion by itself. The issue is whether the rules create clean incentives for teams to attack meaningful objectives. If two sides can look at the live table and decide that a low-risk draw suits everyone, then the problem is already on the board before the referee blows the whistle. FIFA can sell drama, but it cannot pretend incentive design is a minor detail when knockout places are at stake. The situation is becoming more complex for Scotland, and not in the fun way. A heavy defeat to Brazil has moved their World Cup from pitch control to scoreboard survival. Scotland wait on World Cup knockout path after 3-0 defeat by Brazil. Scotland's story is not over unless the official math says it is over, but after losing 3-0 to Brazil, their campaign has shifted into the most stressful role in tournament football, waiting on other teams. Brazil's impact matters here too, because this was not just a Scotland stumble. It was a result that changes the shape of the group and feeds the wider last 32 picture. The Tartan Army are no longer just supporting a team, they are monitoring scenarios. BBC Sport says it is looking at what Scotland require to reach the knockout phase after a 3-0 defeat by Brazil, while the London Evening Standard is framing the question around how Scotland can still qualify for the World Cup last 32. That is the important restraint. Scotland are not to be described as eliminated unless that is officially confirmed, but they are dependent on best third-place team outcomes, and that is a brutal place to live emotionally. A 3-0 defeat does two kinds of damage. The obvious damage is the scoreline. The quieter damage is what it can do to goal difference inside a best third-place race where margins are unforgiving. Against Brazil, Scotland were dealing with one of the tournament's heavyweight football cultures, and the result has left them hoping the wider table behaves kindly. That is never comfortable, because once you need help, control has already left the room. For the Tartan Army, the practical question is painfully real. Stay ready for possible knockout football, or start preparing for the worst. Fans are in limbo because expanded format qualification can keep a team breathing even after a bad night. The cruel part is that breathing is not the same as standing. Scotland now need the right combination of outcomes elsewhere, and Brazil's 3-0 win is the concrete fact sitting at the center of the tension. That is not the only major move today. Australia have a qualification match coming, and their team shape has been hit before the Paraguay game even starts. Australia forced into changes before crucial Paraguay World Cup group game. This is not a routine lineup tweak. When a key Socceroos player is ruled out before a crucial group match, the whole tactical structure can shift. The injury matters because Australia's Group D result affects both direct qualification and the third-place safety net. One forced change can alter pressing, build-up, and defensive cover on the flank. The danger is not only who replaces the missing player, it is what Paraguay target once the replacement is on the pitch. ABC reports that a key Socceroos cog has been ruled out with injury ahead of the Paraguay game, and The Guardian reports Australia are forced into changes for the crucial World Cup group match. The current club detail attached to this injury story is Borussia Mönchengladbach. The available reporting points to a confirmed injury development affecting selection, but it would be wrong to overstate the length of the absence beyond what has been reported. This is about the Paraguay match and the immediate tactical problem in front of Australia. The fan debate has quickly moved toward the safest right wing-back replacement, which tells you a lot about where supporters believe the stress point sits. In a high-stakes group game, that role is not decorative. It affects how Australia defend wide areas, how they progress the ball, and how they protect the back line when possession turns over. If the replacement is too conservative, Australia may lose a crossing and pressing outlet. If the replacement is too aggressive, Paraguay may look at the channel behind him and start licking their lips. Australia's Group D result affects both direct qualification and third-place survival scenarios, so this is not a match where the manager can treat disruption like a minor inconvenience. Forced changes before a game like this test the depth of the squad and the clarity of the plan. The Socceroos need solutions that do not create three new problems, because Paraguay will not politely ignore the injured area out of sporting friendship. And because the World Cup now loves making every result come with a user manual, Australia's injury problem sits inside an even bigger qualification puzzle. Australia and Paraguay face Group D qualification scenarios as Socceroos could survive a loss. The headline that Australia could survive a loss sounds comforting, but it is also dangerous. Survival through third-place math is not a plan, it is a safety net with holes in it. The real story is how Group D connects direct qualification, goal difference, and the wider best third-place table. One result does not live alone anymore. Paraguay have their own route to manage, so Australia cannot act like the only team with a calculator. Fox Sports is reporting on Group D scenarios and standings for Australia and Paraguay, while Fox Sports Australia frames the Socceroos' path around likely opponents and how they could survive even with a loss. Careful with that phrase. Could survive does not mean should accept the risk. It does not make projected opponents confirmed, and it does not erase the third-place route from the conversation. It simply means the math has left some doors open. Here is where the scenario becomes messy in a very modern World Cup way. Australia's result against Paraguay feeds into direct qualification and the best third-place team's table. Goal difference can matter. Results elsewhere can matter. The timing of matches can matter for pressure. A win keeps the cleanest feeling. A draw may or may not be enough depending on the wider table. A loss might still leave a route, but that route asks Australia to trust numbers they do not fully control. For fans, that creates two simultaneous viewing experiences. One is the normal match, tackles, chances, substitutions, nerves. The other is the live table obsession, where every goal in another group suddenly feels like someone has moved your luggage without asking. The Socceroos could survive a loss, according to the scenario reporting, but survival is not the same as control. Against Paraguay, Australia's safest route is still to affect the table themselves. In another development, Mexico's tournament joy now has a serious shadow over it. The issue is not performance this time, it is fan conduct and possible FIFA scrutiny. Mexico fan chant returns against Czechia, raising question of possible FIFA punishment. Mexico's perfect group stage is a football story worth respecting. The return of a homophobic chant is a disciplinary and anti-discrimination issue that cannot be waved away as background noise. The reporting asks whether FIFA will punish Mexico. It does not say punishment has already happened. That distinction is essential if we are dealing with facts instead of outrage fog. The tension is brutal for Mexico, on the pitch, momentum, around the team, a renewed sanctions question. Yahoo Sports reports that the homophobic chant returned during Mexico's World Cup match against Czechia, and the report asks whether FIFA will punish Mexico. So let us be clear on this. The available evidence frames punishment as a question, not a confirmed sanction. We should not say FIFA has punished Mexico unless an official decision says so, but we also should not downplay the anti-discrimination issue just because Mexico are playing well. The football context makes the story sharper. Mexico have advanced to the knockout stage after a perfect group stage, which should be the clean headline. Instead, debate is split between celebrating the team's form and worrying about possible sanctions. That is not a small distraction. World Cups are built around national identity, public celebration, and global visibility. When discriminatory chants return in that environment, the consequences can move beyond embarrassment and into formal disciplinary territory. Mexico now face two different pressures. The players have to keep preparing for knockout football, where their perfect group record will raise expectations. The federation and tournament authorities have to deal with the conduct question around supporters. Fans can love the team and still admit the chant creates a real problem. Pretending otherwise is not loyalty. It is just leaving a lit match next to a sanctions file. From fan conduct to host city messaging, Seattle has become the center of another World Cup argument where match operations and values are colliding in public. Seattle moves ahead with World Cup Pride match plans for Egypt v Iran despite pushback. This is not a generic Pride feature and not a detached political argument. It is a live World Cup operation story around Egypt v Iran, fan access, messaging, and host city policy. Seattle moving ahead matters because it tests how far local inclusion messaging can go inside FIFA's global tournament environment. The pushback from Iran and Egypt makes the symbolism impossible to treat as routine. The key fact is that the match itself has not been reported as moved or cancelled. The Guardian says Seattle will host Egypt v Iran as its World Cup Pride celebration, and the Seattle Times reports Seattle was not swayed by pushback from Iran and Egypt. That is the frame. Seattle's World Cup committee is pushing ahead with Pride match plans despite backlash from the teams involved. It is not a story about the match being cancelled. It is not a story claiming FIFA has banned rainbow flags. It is about how a host city manages inclusion messaging around a fixture loaded with political and cultural sensitivity. Host city match operations and fan entry policies are central to the dispute, which is why the details matter more than slogans. A World Cup venue is not just a stadium for 90 minutes. It is a security plan, a public event, a broadcast stage, and a symbolic space. Seattle is choosing to keep Pride messaging attached to Egypt v Iran, and that choice creates a direct test of how tournament values are expressed when not every participant is comfortable with the expression. Fans are debating inclusion messaging, stadium policy, and political sensitivity because the story sits right where football likes to pretend it does not sit, at the intersection of sport and public identity. The committee's position appears firm based on the reporting, but firmness does not remove operational risk. It makes every decision around signage, fan access, and matchday communication more visible when Egypt v Iran arrives in Seattle. Now the tone changes sharply, because one Mexico story is about possible sanctions, and this one is about people being hurt during World Cup celebration. Driver plows into crowd of World Cup fans in Mexico, injuring at least 17. Mexico's knockout joy has been overshadowed by a serious public safety incident away from the stadium setting. Authorities say a driver plowed into a crowd of World Cup fans in Mexico, and the injury count is the hard fact here. The reporting we have says at least 17 people were injured. That is not a detail to rush past while talking about brackets and form. This is not the moment to speculate about motive. The consequence is already serious enough. A celebration became an emergency scene. The New York Times reports that a driver plowed into a crowd of World Cup fans in Mexico, according to authorities. People reports at least 17 injuries after a car drove through a crowd of cheering fans. So let us be clear on this. The reporting connects the incident to World Cup celebrations, but it should not be treated as a stadium incident unless authorities say that. Public celebrations have their own safety risks, and this one has already produced a significant injury toll. That detail matters because football celebration can become huge very quickly, especially during a World Cup run. Streets fill, traffic patterns break down, people gather in places not built for that many bodies at once, and suddenly the margin for error is thin. Online reaction is focused on safety at mass celebrations after Mexico's qualification, and that is exactly where the conversation belongs right now. Not rumor, not motive, not some cheap attempt to turn pain into a debate before the facts arrive. Authorities will have to establish what happened, and until they do, the responsible line is simple. At least 17 people were injured, and World Cup joy in Mexico was interrupted by a frightening public safety incident. Football can create the gathering. It cannot be allowed to excuse confusion, poor control, or speculation when people are hurt. The confirmed injury count is the concrete center of this story, and we close by circling back to the match that keeps pulling the episode toward it. France against Norway is not just global star theater. Local coverage in Foxborough is now asking the blunt question everyone wants answered. Who will win the World Cup match between France and Norway in Foxborough? The Providence Journal. The Providence Journal frames the France-Norway match in Foxborough around the simplest fan question, who will win? That sounds basic, but basic questions get sharper when Mbappé, Haaland, and knockout qualification are in the same sentence. This should be treated as a supplemental match preview angle, not a new confirmed development. The reporting adds local focus to the same Group F pressure already hanging over France and Norway. Predictions are fun until people pretend they are facts. The only certainty from the story package is that France-Norway carries major attention and direct qualification tension. The Providence Journal headline asks, who will win the World Cup match between France and Norway in Foxborough? That is the clean local hook, and it makes sense. When a World Cup match brings France, Norway, Kylian Mbappé, Erling Haaland, and Group F consequences into one stadium market, the preview question becomes unavoidable. Fans do not only want the tactical lecture, they want to know who has the edge, who is vulnerable, and who might leave the night staring at the round of 32 bracket with a bad feeling. But here is the caution. A prediction piece is not the same as a result, and it is not the same as confirmed qualification. The wider reporting from Al Jazeera and BIN Sports keeps the important frame intact. France-Norway is a marquee showdown with Group F scenarios also involving Senegal and Iraq. That means the match in Foxborough is carrying more than star appeal. It is carrying consequences that can move seeding, routes, and pressure across the group. Put it this way, Mbappé and Haaland may be the names on the billboard, but the actual danger is the table underneath them. France need control, Norway needs service, and both teams have to manage the emotional weight of a match being sold as a duel while functioning as a qualification fight. That is why the local question matters. Who wins in Foxborough is not just a prediction game prompt, it is the hinge for a Group F knockout pass. That is the World Cup right now. Mbappé and Haaland selling the biggest duel, England arguing over Morgan Rogers and Anthony Gordon, the USA trying to stay sharp, Scotland and Australia trapped in third-place math, Mexico facing both a possible disciplinary question and a serious fan safety incident, and Seattle pushing ahead with a pride match plan under pressure. The expanded tournament is giving us more drama, yes, but also more loopholes, more live table anxiety, and more moments where football stops being simple. Keep the receipt close, because the round of 32 is being shaped before some teams even know whether they are in it.